Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Pete. It's a pleasure to be back at the College of Charleston and to be the first two-time speaker. Is it going to be a problem if I move around? Okay, excellent. You guys are not going to come to me, so I'm going to go to you. It's a pleasure to be the first two-time speaker at the College of Charleston's Adam Smith Week. And what I'm talking about tonight is a project that I'm working on with someone else who spoke at Adam Smith Week in 2012, Deidre McCluskey, who has written 2, now 3 books on what we call the bourgeois era, specifically what she calls the bourgeois era. The first volume, published in 2006, is called Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics for an Age of Commerce. And in that, she explains what she calls the bourgeois virtues, the ethics for a commercial era. The second volume, it's called Bourgeois Dignity, Why Economics Can't Explain the Modern World. And in it, she explains how, first of all, a lot of the conventional explanations for why some places are very rich while other places are very poor just don't hold water. We're rich because we had coal? No. We're rich because of slavery? No. We're rich because of imperialism? No. We're rich because of free trade? No. Free trade's great, but they don't explain what it is that we're trying to explain. The third volume, Bourgeois Equality, should appear next year and explains that what ultimately happened was a rhetorical change, a cultural change, a change in the way that we think and speak about commerce and the way that we think and speak about innovation. And that helps to explain why some places are very rich while other places are very poor. That's the topic to which I've devoted my career. That's the topic to which I devote most of my time. And that's the topic that I'm going to be speaking about tonight. Why am I constantly thinking about why some places are very rich while other places are very poor? Well, 2 reasons. First, if you're not asking that question in the social sciences in some form or fashion, you have no claim on anyone's time. I was told that by John Nye, who chaired my dissertation committee at WashU. Okay. So given that he was the person who had to sign off on my dissertation and say, yes, you have done what you need to do to get a PhD, it's pretty clearly important that I need to be asking this question. Second, we live in a world of unimaginable wealth. We live in a world of unimaginable wealth, but we live in a world of unimaginable wealth that is tempered by truly tragic and incredible poverty. We live in a world of unimaginable wealth, a world in which that wealth, though, or our enthusiasm for that wealth, has to be tempered by the existence and the persistence of incredible poverty in different parts of the world. So we want to know, well, how is it that we, meaning people who live in European countries and overseas extensions of European countries, and say like the Asian tigers that have adopted a lot of the institutions and cultural practices that made European countries and their offshoots wealthy, how is it that we got so rich while they stayed so poor? Moreover, why is it that the wealth of nations is more or less limited to the last 2.5 centuries? For almost the entirety of human history, people were very, very, very poor. In current prices, people lived on about $3 a day. $3 a day. Now imagine that you have to get all of your food, all of your clothing, all of your shelter on $3 a day. Most of us probably spent more than $3 a day on coffee. And yet, that's what we lived on for almost the entirety of human history. And there's still people at that standard of living today. Then, right around 1750 or so, give or take a few decades, 1700, give or take a few decades, 1750, give or take a few decades, you know, in the grand scheme of things, we don't have to be super precise, but we shot up the blade of what has been called the hockey stick of human prosperity. And we moved from a world in which we live on $3 a day to a world in which we live on more than $100 a day in many countries and in many places. Now then consider how different our life is. Consider how different our life is compared to our ancestors, compared to those who came before us. I had a friend who posted on Facebook one time that she wished she'd lived in the 19th century because things were so much simpler back then. Right. Because dying of tuberculosis at age 45 is pretty simple. How many of y'all have played Oregon Trail? Okay. How many of you have died of dysentery? You have died of dysentery. Ha ha ha. Okay, that was reality for a lot of people in the 19th century. Now it's a joke based on an awesome computer game. And speaking of awesome computer games, we live in a world in which I can have that very awesome computer game on my pocket supercomputer that will allow me to access almost any piece of information or any piece of knowledge that the human species has come up with. If there's a cat I can imagine, I can find a picture of it. If there's a factoid I can think of, I can find it. If I want to know the secret superhero origins of Magneto, then by God, the Wikipedia article goes into greater depth on the superhero origins of Magneto than, say, like pretty much anything I've ever read about Julius Caesar. It's great. It's great. I love that I can do this. I love that I can carry this around in my pocket, and I can use an app like Evernote as basically an external brain. I can use an app like Evernote as basically an external brain. And I can also, from time to time, entertain myself with one or two of my favorite games. Civilization and SimCity. Yeah. Civilization, I bought it in 2010 for, I think, like $5 or $6. $5 or $6. Less than the price of a movie ticket for the iPhone version of Civilization. Absolutely spectacular. Absolutely amazing. And I whiled away many, many an hour, probably too many hours, playing Civilization, conquering empires, conquering other countries. Well, no, actually, I didn't really do that. I'm sort of a pacifist, so I don't really like to do the military part of Civilization. I'd like to win a technological victory or an economic victory. So playing pacifist Civilization works out pretty well. I had an idea for pacifist Risk one time, and that didn't work out quite as well as pacifist Civilization. But nonetheless, it's a great, fun, wonderful, enjoyable game. SimCity, $0. $0, you can download it on your iPhone. My little congratulations on finishing your PhD gift that I gave myself when I finished my doctorate was the $1 SimCity 2000 CD that I found at a yard sale. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm buying this for $1. Loaded it up on my laptop, spent the week after I defended my dissertation reviewing a few pages of my dissertation a day, making a couple of corrections, and spending the rest of that time playing SimCity. It was awesome. It was awesome. And a lot of us, unfortunately, think of the real world, or think of social reality as if it's like Civilization, or as if it's like SimCity. And in the case of Civilization and SimCity, you plop some cities down in different places, say in Civilization. Say, okay, well here's where Rome needs to be. Okay? Plop. Here's where Corinth needs to be. Okay, great. And so you throw down some cities, and then you decide what to produce in each of those cities. Rome needs a granary, make it so. Corinth needs a barracks, make it so. And so on and so on and so on. You're kind of a central planner of this civilization where you're plopping down cities and deciding what gets built in each of these cities. And SimCity's great, in part for the same reason, or it's fun in part for the same reason, because you throw down some roads, you throw down some residential zones, you throw down some factories and things like that, and you're sort of like master of all that you survey in Civilization and SimCity. And it's great fun, but it's going to be extremely limited as a metaphor for broader social reality, because the little Sims in the game and the citizens of Civilization, while they might not be happy with everything that you do, you're still in a sense kind of moving them around with, the same way that you would move around pieces on a chessboard, so to speak. And this is Adam Smith week. In his first book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he criticized someone that he called the man of system. The man of system, who, according to Smith, is apt to be very wise in his own conceit, and who imagines that he can arrange the members of a great society with the same ease with which he would arrange the pieces on a chessboard, all the while not noticing that the members of a great society have laws of motion all of their own. Okay. That's a paraphrase of Smith. What it basically boils down to is the man of system is someone who treats the world as if he's playing Civilization or as if he's playing SimCity, and imagines that he can basically run other people's lives for them. He doesn't recognize that other people have different values. He doesn't recognize that other people might have different conceptions of the good. He might not recognize that other people have different things that they want to accomplish in the world. And he doesn't respect the liberty and dignity of those people to make their own decisions. This has profound consequences. This has profound consequences for the wealth and well-being of individuals, and it has profound consequences for the wealth and well-being of nations. What McCluskey and I call the Bourgeois Deal. What we call the Bourgeois Deal is basically a tacit agreement within a society that kind of is almost like a three-act play. In the Bourgeois Deal, an innovator effectively says, look, tell you what, let me try out my crazy ideas in the marketplace. Let me try out my different idea for spinning cotton into yarn. Let me try out this steam engine. Let me try out this new-fangled thing. Let me come out with, if you don't mind,
go for it.
Okay, this slightly bigger version of it, okay, so that everyone's saying, what in the world are people going to use that for? I mean, it's basically just like a giant iPhone. Why in the world are people going to, what are people going to use this thing for? Let me come up with this new thing. Let the consumers decide, let the customers decide whether that is worthwhile, whether this is worthwhile, whether taking water out of a spring and putting it in a bottle and selling it to people is a valid and operational business plan. Let me do that. Let me keep the rewards. Let me profit from so doing. I recognize that in Act 2 of this great drama, other people are going to come in and other people are going to imitate. I recognize that there will be competition in Act 2 of this great drama, but in Act 3, we're all going to be richer. In Act 3, we're all going to be richer. The Bourgeois Deal is effectively a cultural deal that allows for what Joseph Schumpeter calls creative destruction. It allows for what Joseph Schumpeter calls creative destruction. And that, in a nutshell, is the process of capitalist growth. Or, to use Professor McCluskey's preferred term, the process of growth in a society characterized by trade-tested betterment. Trade-tested betterment. She doesn't like the word capitalism. I don't like the word capitalism because it doesn't describe what we actually mean by capitalism. And often people think, well, if it's good for the capitalists, then therefore it must be capitalism. Well, no, not necessarily. Our mutual friend Steve Horowitz has what he calls Horowitz's first law of political economy, which is that no one hates capitalism more than capitalists. No one hates capitalism more than capitalists. Specifically meaning, competition isn't really that great. You don't like being competed with. You don't like having your profits eroded. You don't like trade-tested betterment. Because if you're Apple, you come up with an iPhone, well, there might be someone else who can come up with something a little bit better. You invent a search engine, and then along comes Google, and they create something better. You invent the most important website in the world, MySpace, in the mid-2000s. And indeed, I remember, I think it was in about 2009 or 2010, I saw a book on the new acquisition shelf at Rhodes College, where I was teaching economics, saying, the development of MySpace, the history and development of the most important website in the world. And I thought, wow, that's one of the most unfortunately timed book publications I think I've ever seen. You come up with MySpace, and you get creatively destroyed by Facebook. You get creatively destroyed by whoever happens to come along next. You open a hardware store, you get creatively destroyed by Home Depot. You start Walmart, and you perhaps eventually get creatively destroyed by Amazon. You start a grocery store, or you start any of a number of things, and you open yourself up to creative destruction by, for example, there's a startup in Birmingham called Shipt. S-H-I-P-T. Shipt. And starting in May, for the low price of $79 a year, and I'm sure this is just the introductory price, $79 a year plus a slight markup, they're offering unlimited same-day grocery delivery from Publix. Unlimited same-day grocery delivery from Publix. As the father of a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old, and the husband of Wonder Woman, A wife who gets to take the 6-year-old, 4-year-old, and 2-year-old to Publix and Walmart and Costco regularly, this may be, quite literally, the greatest thing since sliced bread. Because it means that all we would need to do is click on a couple of things on our phone, and we don't have to go get the sliced bread. Someone goes and gets the sliced bread for us. Who's made better off by this? Who's made better off by this? Not gods and kings. Not the wealthy. I mean, the wealthy are better off, but honestly, if you're rich enough, if you're a billionaire, then you probably can already pay a flunky or pay someone to go do your shopping for you. So the innovation of Shipt is not a big deal for you. If you're Bill Gates, you're probably not doing your own shopping. If you're David Koch, you're probably not doing your own shopping. If you're Charles Koch, you're probably not doing your own shopping. If you're Warren Buffett, probably not doing your own shopping. If you're Carlos Slim, probably not doing your own shopping, etc., 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 etc. If you're a member of the Walton family, ironically may not be the right word for this. I'm a bit of a dilettante, or excuse me, a bit of a pedant when it comes to word usage. So I'm always afraid that I'm using ironic incorrectly. Okay. If you're a member of the Walton family, you're probably not doing your own shopping. So Shipt does not really create a whole lot in the way of benefits for you. Shipt does not really create a whole lot in the way of benefits for you. Who wins? Who are the big winners from Shipt?
Middle class.
The middle class. Yeah, the middle class, the bourgeoisie. Okay, in a sense, the middle class, the poor. So people who now have new employment opportunities, driving groceries back and forth between Publix and people's houses. People who now no longer praise God, praise Jesus, glory, glory, hallelujah. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. No longer have to take their 6-year-old, 4-year-old, and 2-year-old to the grocery store. Because they can get the stuff shipped to them. I've been in Charleston now since Monday. And I have taken Uber everywhere. This has been something that, if it were to successfully enter the Birmingham market, I know would completely change my life. I may not even own a car if we had access to Uber in Birmingham. When I was making my travel arrangements to come to Charleston, I did sort of the usual thing. I said, okay, I booked my flight, booked my hotel, guess I need to book a rental car. Then I thought, wait, I think I've read somewhere that Uber does business in Charleston. I've read that Uber does business in Charleston. And to rent a car would cost, whatever. I forget how much a rental car would cost, 30 or 40 bucks a day or something. And I'd have to put gas in it, and I'd have to worry about insurance, which fortunately I have through my credit card. I have some coverage on rental cars and things like that. And I also absolutely hate driving. And I especially hate driving in places I don't already know. So instead of renting a car and doing all the blah blah that comes with renting a car and driving it around, I'm just going to outsource this to people for whom, with a couple of flicks of my thumb, I can call and who will come and pick me up and drive me wherever I need to go. Okay? Who are the big winners from access to Uber? Once again, if you're a multi-billionaire, you probably have someone to drive you around. Unless we're like Sam Walton, who drove around his old beat-up pickup truck. Or I'd be interested in knowing whether Warren Buffett has his own driver. I know he lives in the same the same house he bought for $30,000 in the 50s in Omaha, Nebraska. But nonetheless, if you're a multi-bajillionaire, having access to Uber doesn't really change your standard of living that much. It doesn't necessarily make you that much richer or that much wealthier. Rather, the benefits are way farther down the income distribution. And indeed, Joseph Schumpeter said that the real benefits, the real gains, the real great thing about creative destruction in a market economy is not that we get more cheap silk stockings for the Queen of England. Because the Queen of England probably has as many silk stockings as she wants. And furthermore, it's not that Louis XIV has access to more candles. Because once again, he's got people to light candles for him and do all this stuff, do his cooking, his cleaning, etc. The benefit of economic growth, according to Schumpeter, and this is implicit throughout Smith, the benefit of economic growth is that we get cheaper stockings for factory girls who are able to get them for progressively less and progressively less and progressively less and progressively less in terms of labor. So you don't have to work as hard to get not just the same amount of stuff, but better stuff. I can't remember the numbers precisely, but Don Boudreau, who actually has a great video about the hockey stick of economic growth and is a friend of McCluskey, has actually crunched some of the numbers and looked at a refrigerator freezer. Okay, so here's one of the really cool things about giving talks like this in the internet age. Since every single one of you is carrying a pocket supercomputer, you can fact check me in real time. Okay. Which means that in this case I can qualify this by saying I'm trying to remember the numbers off the top of my head, but what I'm going to give you is basically a ballpark. You can actually look up the numbers. You can actually look up the numbers and fact check me in real time if you either A, want something very precise, or B, believe that I'm full of it. You can, in real time, check every single claim that I'm making. Who benefits from that?
Us.
You do. Right. You benefit from that. You know, it terrifies me because that means I can't just get away with saying anything I want to say and expect you guys to believe it because I'm Mr. Fancy Economics Man who has a fancy economics PhD and does fancy economics teaching. The internet has been a great leveler. The internet has been a great leveler in that you can decide for yourself and figure out for yourself what is true and what's not true. So Dr. Calcano and I can tell you what we think, tell you what we believe, tell you the conclusions of our research, and then also tell you basically what to read to figure out whether what we're saying is valid or not. But anyway, Don Boudreau looked at some of the numbers for a refrigerator freezer and found that so for the average factory line worker in the 1950s making about $2 an hour, it took 116 hours of labor. 116 hours of labor at $2 an hour in a factory, mind you, where air conditioning, I don't know if they had air conditioning, it probably wasn't nearly as pleasant, or nearly as awful as, it wasn't nearly as pleasant and was probably a lot more awful than factory work today. 116 hours to buy a refrigerator freezer. Today, apparently, at average wages, it takes something like 50 hours. No, excuse me, not 50 hours. I want to say 20 hours. 15 hours, 20 hours, something like that. Some massive reduction in the amount of labor that needs to be expended in order to get a refrigerator freezer. And furthermore, labor that's undertaken under conditions that are probably a lot more pleasant than they used to be historically. The benefit of economic growth, the benefit of the bourgeois deal, has been that we have created, according to Schumpeter, relatively cheap stuff, or relatively easy to access stuff, relatively easy to get stuff for normal, average, everyday people. Okay. The question is one of esteem. The question, according to McCluskey, is one of esteem and one of liberty. If I remember correctly, the original title of her 2010 volume was Bourgeois Liberty and Dignity. Bourgeois Liberty and Dignity. So granting people the freedom to innovate, granting people the freedom to come up with a newer, better way to get people from one part of town to another, granting people the freedom to invent a better mousetrap without having to go to the centralized mousetrap bureau, is what has helped to create this process of creative destruction. That's what's unleashed the forces of free markets, the forces of free minds, and created a world in which we are far, 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 far wealthier than we used to be. So part of it's liberty. Go ahead and do what you want, test it out in the market, and we won't kill you. Or we won't lock you in a cage. All right, now then, okay, that might sound extreme. That might sound extreme to say, well, you know, who's threatening to kill people? Who's threatening to lock people in cages? Well, the city of Birmingham, for one. You guys have Uber. And Uber is great. We do not have Uber in Birmingham. Why? Because last summer, city officials rewrote the transportation regulations to recognize and perhaps allow ride-sharing services. But the regulations were written in such a way as to effectively make it impossible for someone to be like an Uber X driver and actually make money, or be a Lyft driver and actually make money. If you try to do this by, say, your own rules, or you come up with, you try to become an Uber driver in Birmingham and you get stopped, well, in that case, perhaps someone's going to fine you. The cop's going to give you a ticket or something like that. You say, well, look, I'm just driving people around for money. I'm not going to pay this. So they come and get you and say, well, we're going to lock you in a cage. We're going to put you in jail for the high crime of driving an economist from the airport to his house without having the right stickers on your windshield. It's a very bad thing. And so perhaps you resist there, and then things escalate. They escalate rather quickly. Okay. When we rely on liberty, when we rely on trade-tested betterment, rather than the opinions and inclinations of political surrogates, then we can get, again, the kind of prosperity that we've come to enjoy over the last several centuries, and particularly right now, in relatively prosperous societies. It's more than that. It's more than that, though, and this is part of our argument about the bourgeois deal. The way that we talk has changed. The way that we talk has changed, and specifically the way that we talk about commerce has changed. In 2010, I wrote an article for Forbes called Battle of the Speeches, because the day that Steve Jobs unveiled the iPad was also the day that Barack Obama gave a State of the Union address. I don't remember anything that Barack Obama said in the State of the Union address. I mean, that's not necessarily a knock against President Obama, but it wasn't particularly memorable. I do remember the ensuing conversation after Steve Jobs and Apple unveiled the iPad. Part of that was, what in the world are people going to do with this thing? Part of it was, why couldn't they have come up with a better name than iPad? Okay. And another big part of it was, whoa, this is a really cool thing that we're not really sure what it's going to do yet, but it has the potential and the possibility to completely change the world. When people think about heroes today, or when they think about people who are really neat, or people that we sort of esteem and look up to, yeah, politicians are up there. Yeah, generals are up there. Yeah, sports stars are up there. But also up there are people like Bill Gates, people like Sam Walton, people like Steve Jobs, people like Larry Page and Sergey Brin, people like Elon Musk. Who's Elon Musk and what's he doing? Yeah, tell us about Elon Musk.
He is the creator of PayPal.
Okay.
Once he sold that, he created Tesla.
Okay. Helped to create PayPal. All right, that's pretty cool. And then sold PayPal and started Tesla Motors. Okay. Two thoughts on that. Two thoughts, actually three. First, in a world with Uber and ride sharing, I don't know if I'll ever own another car after I get rid of the car that I have now. Okay. Second thought. I am reasonably certain that my 6-year-old, my 4-year-old, my 2-year-old will never actually have to drive. You know, all that time you spent in driver's ed, they're not going to have to go through that. They're not going to have to waste that time and energy learning how to drive because either A, Uber and Lyft will be there to do it for them, or B, driverless cars will have come online by the time they're teenagers. Okay? I'm more optimistic about the first than about the second, but I look forward to spending my twilight years in a world in which, you know, after the Apple Watch comes out, I'll have on my wrist something with which I can call a driverless app dispatched car to come and get me and take me somewhere. Probably something solar powered to come and take me somewhere, or to deliver me a pizza, or any of a number of other things. Third, in the event that I do someday have to buy another car, it will almost certainly be a Tesla. Electronic vehicles at the cutting edge. If you read The Oatmeal, which is a truly fantastic webcomic by Matthew Inman, he talks about driving a Tesla. And the way that an internal combustion engine works is with explosions. And I'll be honest, I don't really know that I want explosions 3 or 4 feet away from me. So if we can replace that with battery-powered Tesla motors, then that would be pretty awesome. And so Elon Musk has done those things. What else has Elon Musk done?
He has a solar company too.
Okay, solar company. Yep. Okay. What else?
SpaceX.
SpaceX. SpaceX. Incredible efficiency when it comes to throwing stuff up into the atmosphere, throwing stuff up into orbit. Why does he have SpaceX? What's his ultimate goal there? Yeah?
License to steal.
License to steal? What do you... Okay. Ooh, hold that thought.
He's really good at that.
Yeah. Okay. Government contracts. Okay, so yes. So SpaceX is in part funded with government contracts. A big part of it is it's funded with government contracts, and Tesla was subsidized. Now then, those are going to create inefficiencies. That much is true. But I think in the broader context, it sort of misses the point of the bourgeois era. Why does Elon Musk want the resources that he's getting from SpaceX? And we can have a discussion about government contracts here in a little bit. Okay. Adam Smith said there's much ruin in a nation. Government contracts constitute a lot of that ruin. However, in a world in which we allow innovators to innovate and esteem innovators for innovating, people like Elon Musk, who says he wants to die on Mars. Okay. All right. I don't agree with the fact that he's getting government contracts to do some of this, but I would much rather, if I'm going to be taxed, have that money going to pay for the experiments of someone like Elon Musk who wants to colonize Mars than to have that money going to, invade a country filled with people who sort of don't look like us. Or those people across the river who, them-a-stan, who, as opposed to us-a-stan, are somehow awful. For the better part of history, indeed, that's what tax revenue did. For the better part of history, that's what tax revenue did. Kings and queens fought wars so they get tax revenue. They got tax revenue so that they could fight wars and be fantastic and noble. I agree that government contracts are extremely inefficient. Many things governments do are extremely inefficient. But given that the alternative is more war, and given that the alternative is more feasts and banquets for politicians, I would much rather have the money going to Elon Musk so that he can figure out how to put stuff into space than have the money going to pay for, alcohol for congressional staffers. I'll close with this. Pete mentioned that I worked in graduate school with Nobel laureate Douglas North. And in 2009, North and two of his colleagues, John Joseph Wallace and Barry Weingast, published a book called Violence and Social Orders, a conceptual framework for interpreting recorded human history, or a conceptual framework for interpreting history. So, very modest title, as part of a very modest project, which they were trying to explain the world. And in it, they talked about two different kinds of order, two different kinds of political order and economic order. They talked about a limited access order and an open access order. A limited access order and an open access order. In a limited access order, the way to get rich is to prevent people from competing with you. The way to get rich is to prevent people from competing with you. To have taxi medallions in New York City, or to have taxi licenses in Birmingham, Alabama, and prevent Uber from competing with you. So that you can restrict output, and raise price, and enjoy monopoly profits. Okay? That's a world in which economic growth is possible, but in which economic growth and technological change are not going to be very rapid. Okay? That's going to be a world in which you get rich by getting privileges from the government, or getting privileges from those with the guns. By contrast, an open access order is one in which the way to get rich is to invent that proverbial better mousetrap, to come up with Uber, to come up with the iPhone, to come up with the steam engine, to come up with explosive, awesome, interesting, cool, and neat innovations and new ways of organizing, say, the fundamental particles of the universe, or new ways of organizing factors of production, or new ways of organizing stuff so that you get rich, but in the process you make everybody else rich too. The bourgeois deal basically says, leave me alone. Okay. And it doesn't say leave me alone because it's like some sort of antisocial thing, or because members of the bourgeoisie, or because innovators are like pathological, terrible, awful people. It basically says, look, I've got a lot of really cool ideas, or at least a lot of what I think are really cool ideas. So please, let me pursue those cool ideas. Let me reap the rewards from pursuing those cool ideas. And in the process, I'll make you rich too. By adopting the bourgeois deal, or variations on the bourgeois deal, the West got rich. The Asian tigers got rich. Now countries like China and India are getting rich. And indeed, we're observing the largest movement out of extreme poverty in the history of the human species. It's very, very easy, therefore, to be extremely optimistic when we look forward, when we consider the power of free minds and free markets in a world where we esteem and honor those who make our lives better. With that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have, and I'm happy to continue the discussion. Yes?
I have a question.
Sure.
I spend a lot of time thinking about how technology and kind of modern innovations affect a sentiment of like elitism in society.
Ah, okay.
And I'd be interested to hear, because you hear about, we say everyone has an iPhone now, but there's a huge percentage of our population in America, at least, that don't.
Okay.
And you see that in schools that don't have the right technology and all that. And I'd be interested to hear how you'd respond to how modern innovations affect kind of the lower class and how we could bridge that gap going forward so there is an assessment.
Ah, okay. So the question, if you didn't hear it, was were you finished? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So the question, if you didn't hear it, was about technology and status. So there's this yawning gap between the technological haves and the technological have-nots. It just so happens that I'm better than all of you. How do I know that? What's this? It's an iPhone 6 Plus. It's an iPhone 6 Plus. And I just so happen to get my sense of self-worth from owning really cool, latest, neatest gadgets, like the iPhone 6 Plus. Anybody else in the room have an iPhone 6 Plus? Anyone? Yeah. All right. All right. I'm pretty awesome. Okay. Well, no. All right. I don't, in fact, get my sense of self-worth from having cool, neat technology. And you raise a really, really interesting point. You raise a really interesting point that there's a sense in which technology and things like that can be status symbols. Technology and things like that can be status symbols. And there probably are insecure people out there, you might know some of them, who are just like, I have an iPhone 6 Plus. Please like me. Please like me. Okay. That's a bit of a moral failing on the part of someone who's going to try to get their status through something like an iPhone. Where I think that's really interesting and really useful is that, a lot of this stuff's probably going to begin at the top, but it's going to diffuse down very quickly. It's going to diffuse down very quickly. I travel a lot, and I generally tend to fly Delta when I have the opportunity to, but I also take Greyhound pretty frequently. And Greyhound is, you meet a lot of interesting people on Greyhound. The median Greyhound customer does not have the income of the median Delta customer. And so one thing I noticed is on my last Greyhound trip, I looked around and it's like, almost everyone on this bus, it seems like, has a smartphone. That's pretty remarkable. Now then, that doesn't suggest that there aren't big differences between the relatively wealthy and the relatively poor. It suggests to me that if you think you're cool because you have cool technology, you need to get over yourself. But we see this downward diffusion of new technologies like smartphones and things like that, so that what used to be the playthings of the very wealthy, televisions, VCRs, shoot. How many of y'all have ever actually programmed a VCR before? We might be to the point where, like Pete, you and I, and so a few of you have actually programmed a VCR before. How many have ever watched a movie on beta? Okay. Things that used to be the toys and playthings of the rich, DVD players, TVs, and things like that, everybody has them. Air conditioning, pretty much everybody has them. The policy prescription, I would say, meaning not necessarily a government policy, but what you and I should do as members of a free and prosperous society to make that society more humane is, first of all, again, realize that you're probably not as cool as you think you are. Just fact of the matter, you're probably not as cool as you think you are. I remember I had a friend in grad school who said we would be shocked if we realized how little time other people spend thinking about us. Okay. Probably not as cool as you think you are, and this probably doesn't necessarily make you super duper cool in anyone's eyes. Second, hold on for just a second. Recognize that the drive for status is probably a human universal. That's probably a fundamental fact about the human species. For whatever reason, we've been programmed by our history to want to dominate others or want to appear like we're better than others. In that case, I think a bourgeois commercial society in which I can demonstrate my status by having cool technology is way better than a society in which I demonstrate my status by, being lord of the land and taxing people and things like that. I would much, much, much rather have a world in which people get status by having money and possessions than a world in which they have status by actively oppressing people. So I appreciate your patience with a long-winded answer. I saw a couple of hands. I've seen three hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. Go for it.
I was just curious as your thoughts as to, people usually say that the middle class is increasing in size, but I have the argument otherwise, saying that people from lower class or lower status classes don't have access to financial assets just because they don't have the financial means. And that those thresholds really offer financial assets to gain wealth only to the people that can afford them.
Questions about access are really, really interesting. And they're especially interesting in when we're talking about business schools. I had what I thought was a great idea when I taught at Rhodes, that what we should do is have the Financial Management Association basically run a mutual fund for relatively poor people. So, you've all heard of microfinance, right? So this would be like micro investing. So we have a thing at Samford called the Bulldog Fund, where a group of finance students actually manages part of the university endowment in what's effectively a mutual fund. And I would love to see us offer shares in something like the Bulldog Fund, or when I was at Rhodes, offer shares in a fund created by students. But as I understand it from conversations I've had, there are big-time regulatory barriers to exactly that. Big-time regulatory barriers to exactly that. That if I said, hey, I want to start a mutual fund, there are a lot of people who would, let's say, question that. And so that's actually something that puts a bit of a barrier in the way of asset accumulation for the very, very poor. Because you need something like if you want to start a mutual fund with Vanguard, you need like $1,000. And for a lot of people, that's, okay, no big deal. $1,000 and I've started a mutual fund. For a lot of people, $1,000 is the difference between whether you have a place to live and food on the table, and a way to get from here to there. I don't have a sort of like a perfect answer for how to fix all of this. That's one thing that I think could carry us toward greater equality. A second thing I think would be better financial education. Better financial education in schools and places like that, helping people really understand how powerful compound interest actually is. And if push comes to shove, there are efficient and inefficient ways to tax, and efficient and inefficient ways to sort of reset the starting points for a society. There's some places that do this way better than others. I think in general, though, what we need to do is find ways to extend the political, ethical, cultural, and social institutions that have allowed innovation downward. So 1, make it easier for people to start, say, financial services for the poor. 2, make it easier for poor people to monetize their most valuable assets, which are going to be their labor and their human capital. We live in a country with extensive occupational licensing, where, much like driving Uber and any of a number of other things, you need permission from the government to work. And the incidence of this falls primarily on the poor. Morris Kleiner has a really neat book in 2006 on occupational licensing, showing that it restricts competition. Okay? It's a very, very good question. Yeah?
Yeah, you mentioned talking about technology, benefits that we...
Sorry, if you could speak up a little bit, I'm having trouble hearing your projection. Yeah.
But one of my questions though is that when you have a situation where you have technology that you get your groceries, you have technology that you don't even have to go talk to people and you just write them and things like that. And you lose a little bit of social interaction, human interaction. And is there a chance that kind of bring us down a little bit as a society to biological perspective? Because I know we see a lot of times in the third world places where they have to work for everything they do, that they have a much better work mentality. They're more willing to work for things
If you can hit me on Twitter, I'll answer that via email. Okay, next question. No, seriously. Okay, so the question is are we dehumanized in a sense, or are we losing something fundamentally human because of communication technology? Are we, and then in a second sense, are we spoiled by technology? And the second question, are we spoiled by technology and prosperity, raises a point that Michael Novak from the American Enterprise Institute raised in his recent essay, Keratopolis. And he says, it's great to be politically free and great to be economically free, but if we use that liberty to live like pigs, then it's not really clear what the value then is of being politically free and economically free. And indeed, I think this is one of the great tragedies of wealthy Western civilization, is that we are blessed with so very much. We're blessed with so very much, and we don't steward it well, we don't steward it wisely. We use our pocket supercomputers to access things that are probably not ennobling. Okay, and I'll let you use your imaginations as to what some of those things might be. So in that sense, technology might enable those things, but first, those have been constant throughout history. Second, I'm not sure that the relative price of iniquity and dissipation has fallen as a result of technology. I think maybe it just manifests itself differently. I've done some work on Walmart and its effect on societies, and in a series of papers, my co-authors and I look at how Walmart affects social capital and find that it kind of doesn't. So the quality of your relationships, frequency with which you have dinner with your friends, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're using Walmart as sort of a stand-in for big, broad bourgeois capitalism. We look at how Walmart affects people's values and find that, yeah, once again, Walmart doesn't affect whether you vote Democrat or Republican. It doesn't affect whether you consider yourself old-fashioned or not. Things like that. I'll be very interested in seeing someone replicate our studies using data on Facebook, data on Google, data on other stuff. Those of you who have to write a bachelor's essay at some point, Dr. Kakano and I were talking about this earlier, there's your idea. All right? Find Carden, Quartermanch, and Miners 2009A, 2009B, replicate them using data for Facebook, and in fact actually improve on our insights. The second question was about technology and alienation, where maybe our human interactions are not as human as they used to be. I think they're just different. Online interactions and online communications can be as meaningful. And perhaps you're carrying a larger portfolio of acquaintances rather than a small portfolio of really, really good friends. It's not clear to me necessarily that you're worse off in that situation. Now, I will say where we're unambiguously better off is when you have people with weird niche preferences. People with weird niche preferences and or people who are extreme introverts. For people who are real introverts, the ability to interact from behind a computer screen is a godsend. And for people with really weird niche preferences, then, I mean, the 21st century really is sort of an undiscovered country that's going to create all sorts of really great, neat, cool stuff. My 6-year-old son loves elevators. Elevators and hotels. Elevators, hotels, and a handful of other things, and Minecraft. But seriously, so yesterday, it was either yesterday or a couple of days ago, I FaceTimed him, using my phone, FaceTimed him and took him on a tour of the hotel I'm staying at. And we went to ride the elevator, and so I showed him the call buttons. He's like, oh, it's a ThyssenKrupp. I'm like, dude, you're kind of scaring me a little bit, all right? And so we homeschool our kids, and so people are asking from time to time, like, oh, aren't you afraid that your kids are behind the others because, I don't know, Jacob doesn't know his state capitals, or there's something that kids are learning in first grade that he's not. And I will start responding, well, oh, you mean little Billy can't tell the difference between a Kone elevator and a Dover elevator just by looking at the buttons? Oh, aren't you worried? Right? Okay, so Jacob loves elevators, and there's an entire community. There's a whole huge community of people who make videos of elevators and post them on YouTube and comment on those videos. The two of the leaders of the internet elevator, the online elevator community, and yes, that's a thing, are a guy named Andrew Reams, whose YouTube handle is Diesel Ducey. He's just a guy from Roanoke, Virginia. A second is a kid named TJ. His YouTube handle is TJ Elevator Fan. He's like a kid from Charlotte who does all these elevator tours and hotel tours and things like that, and has a couple of million YouTube views of things like this. I actually have for my son, or actually for all of our kids, but mostly for the 6-year-old, I actually have my own YouTube channel called Elevating Economist. And I think yesterday I posted a video of an elevator at the Citadel. So what technology is doing to kind of bring this full circle is, I don't think it's necessarily alienating us. I think it's going to provide much better matching on unique niche characteristics, where the weird people will be able to reach out and find other weird people who know their pain and share their passion for elevators. Okay. Yeah.
Do you believe that in modern society now, in the 21st century, that the more education you have, the more opportunity you have, the wealth is?
Absolutely.
You really do? Okay. I don't have my degree yet.
Yep.
And I'm a loans consultant at CD Bank.
Uh-huh.
I become a manager of a bank.
Sure.
And I still don't have my degree,
Uh-huh.
but yet in today's society, with the job market the way it is, it's who you know, not what you know.
Yeah.
And that a business will train you the way they want you to
Right.
be trained. So
Yep.
in a way, you do believe still, though, that the more education that you get, the higher up the ladder you get.
Okay.
Even though that once you get your bachelor's or master's and you go into the workforce, the business will literally say to you, okay, you were taught this way, now do it this way.
Oh my goodness. That is a great question, and I know that we're a little bit after 7 o'clock, so if you want me to give a second lecture on the economics of education, I can, but I'd be kind of riffing off of Brian Kaplan, who you should probably have down for Adam Smith Week at some point. Yeah, so the more education you have, the more schooling you have, the better your opportunities are going to be. Why do you go to college? Why do you go to college? You get a job. How do you get that job? Okay, well, you go to college. You go to college so you can get a job. What is it about college that helps you get the job? Connections, yes. Very, very good. I was expecting someone to say skills. I'm like, no, I grade introductory macroeconomics exams. All right, and I've done so for a very, very long time. I know that skills are not the reason you're in college. Now that we might say that, but connections are a very, very, very big part of it. Brian Kaplan is working on a book that he hopes to finish sometime called The Case Against Education, in which he argues that education should not be subsidized because we're basically subsidizing an arms race. So the more degrees you pile up, the better signals you can send about the kind of person that you are. I've seen college referred to as a 4-year marshmallow test. And the marshmallow test is a psychological experiment in which they took some kids and said you can either have 1 marshmallow right now, or if you wait 5 minutes, you can have 2 marshmallows. And the kids who waited the 5 minutes for the 2 marshmallows ultimately had better life outcomes because they were the kind of people who were more patient and were willing to endure short-run dissatisfaction for long-run gains. So the value, a lot of the value of a college education, it is skills. It is that you know something about macroeconomics, but it's also that you have demonstrated by getting through it and actually getting the degree that you can do something that is long, unpleasant, at times unpleasant, at times it seems pointless and will probably be a good employee. Kaplan refers to what's called the sheepskin effect, which is merely having the degree. Merely having the degree is what matters. So let's suppose, for example, that I had, for some reason, had filed the wrong piece of paperwork and never actually got my PhD. Doesn't mean I would know any less than I actually do, but my opportunities would have been completely different. Okay. Should we make this the last question? Yeah. Okay. Should we have made the last question like 10 minutes ago, probably? I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, I'll answer quickly. I apologize.
Yes, you mentioned billionaires. I'm curious who your favorite billionaires are.
My favorite billionaires. That's a good question. Is Elon Musk a billionaire?
I think so.
I'm sure he is.
Okay, then Elon Musk. Yeah. Yeah. I'm willing to forgive Elon Musk the government contracts and things like that because of his vision for the future. Okay. So, all right. With that, thank you so much for sticking around for a few extra minutes.